What happens when the justice system gets it wrong? When innocent people are convicted and sent to prison? When they've exhausted all their appeals but still aren't free? Does that ever happen in Jamaica? How big a problem is it? Is there any help, any hope for people like that? I'm Andrew Wiles, and this is Stuck, a podcast exploring wrongful convictions in Jamaica, how they happen, who they impact, and what we can do about them.
Tell the judge, tell the jury, tell the news, them no hear me. Lose my mind, lose my time, lost my life nearly. Holding on barely, clearly the system fail me. Tell me who go clear me.
Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Wiles. If it's the first time that you're joining us, this is Stuck, and I'm the host of this program. Stuck addresses wrongful convictions in Jamaica. We ask 3 questions: how they happen, who they impact, and what we can do about them. And it's one thing to talk about wrongful convictions. It's something entirely different to have been wrongfully convicted. And it's very important to talk about it. We think that's really important. That's why we're doing it. But it's also important to listen. And we want to listen to the people who have lived experience and professional experience, research experience, to help us to understand this really complex issue because there are many things related to wrongful convictions that strike a lot of people as foreign, as new. That's how it struck me. And I have had a lot of eye-opening experiences learning about this topic. And I think that today you will have some eye-opening experiences as you listen to our guests. It's my privilege to welcome Maria Shepherd, who is a Canadian exoneree. She's also the founder of Shepherd Advocacy and Litigation. She's extremely successful and a resilient person by every measure, but you will appreciate her resiliency more when you hear her story, and you will understand the passion that she brings to this area when you know what she has been through. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn this program over to Maria to allow her to share her story. And so without any further ado, Maria.
Thank you, Andrew, for having me. It is quite an honor, especially in the areas that you're looking to investigate wrongful convictions, specifically Jamaica. That scores straight to my heart, something that I'm generally interested in. But thank you also for allowing me to share my experience, my personal experience. What I'm going to share with you may have some graphic moments in it, but I do hope that it will allow people to see and have better insight on the causes of wrongful convictions. So before I lead into that, some of the leading causes of wrongful convictions, as we know it, is eyewitness identification, false confessions, Mr. Big stings, false guilty pleas, tunnel vision, systemic discrimination, the evolution of errors in forensic science, jailhouse informant testimony, and professional misconduct. In my case alone, out of the 9 that I've listed here, you'll hear about at least 4 that was involved in my case. In my case, I was silenced by a sea of authority, but here I am, years later, able to share my story, and I'm grateful. So I'm going to share my experience as a stepmother wrongfully convicted, charged, convicted, and imprisoned for manslaughter here in Canada for a crime that never happened. It was a miscarriage of justice for 25 years, and I've suffered an unjust punishment for loving Cassandra, who was my 3-year-old stepdaughter. In the eyes of the law, Cassandra was my stepdaughter, but in my heart, she was my first daughter. law is printed in black and white, and us in the legal community often, we do rely on case law here, but what is important that there is a gray in between those lines, and we mustn't forget them. It's the untold story of someone who has been silenced and outshadowed by a sea of authority, as I've said earlier. My husband and I married on August 5th, 1989, and we started a new little family with my son Jordan and Ashley's daughter Cassandra, who we had interim custody of. Jordan and Cassandra grew to be very close. They loved each other deeply, and they were very much brother and sister, like hand in glove. And we had so many dreams as a family when we first came together. But by 1991, our dreams were shattered. In April of 1991, I sat in a holding cell at the headquarters of Peel Regional Police, charged with killing Cassandra. How I ended up there will be shocking to many. While in the cell awaiting bail, I would hold on to hope that someone would help me bring out the truth of what the police had done to me and my family, and that all would know that I was innocent. But for 25 years, we were robbed of the right to openly grieve Cassandra. Losing her was devastating. It robbed us of precious moments between a mother and a child and her children, the moments at that stage in their life which are critical in forming a bond with the long-term bonds with the children. It robbed me here in Canada of my freedom and protections under the Charter. In early of 1991, Cassandra became sick, and we brought her to our family doctor, Dr. Chang. Dr. Chang felt that perhaps Cassandra had gastroenteritis, and by February 8, 1991, Cassandra would be admitted to Peel Memorial Hospital in Brampton. Her stay would be about a month. We advised Cassandra's hospital medical team in February that Cassandra's birth mother and grandmother also had seizures. During her stay in the hospital, Cassandra underwent a series of tests, including a CAT scan, to try and determine why she was so sick. But by the time discharge came on March 11th, there were still no concrete answers as to why Cassandra was vomiting so much. There was no mention of any concerns regarding seizures in Cassandra. Cassandra seemed to have improved slightly while she was in the hospital, but the only discharge instructions were to do follow-up visits with various doctors. A follow-up with one doctor, a neurologist, stands out for us the most. When we attended for the follow-up appointment with the neurologist, he would tell us that there was a little bit more space between Cassandra's brain and her skull, but that this was normal. There was no mention of anything else, and no further follow-up visits were scheduled. We were happy to have Cassandra back home. We were so happy to have her back home, and she restarted access visits with her mom, her birth mother. But after a few weeks, Cassandra's vomiting returned with a vengeance and would become, my apologies, she began projectile vomiting, and she wouldn't be able to hold down much food, and at times would become severely lethargic. We continued regular doctor's visits and continued to seek medical advice. We were told to continue giving her Gravol and was told to change the amount and times of the food. Smaller meals at more frequent times seemed to be the solution at the time, but it didn't help Cassandra. On April 9th of 1991, Cassandra experienced what we now have learned was a petite malseizure in the early afternoon. Her eyes had rolled to the back of her head, and her shoulder twitched very briefly. I was a young mother, and at the time I did not know that this was a seizure in a child. Later that afternoon, my husband arrived home from work. Shortly after his arrival, Cassandra had vomited again. He took Cassandra to the upstairs bathroom to bathe and then changed her, and then he brought her downstairs to the living room. I was in the kitchen just adjacent to the living room. Moments later, Cassandra had a grand mal seizure. Her eyes had rolled back to her head, and her body was jerking violently. It was terrifying, heartbreaking, and devastating. She stopped breathing. Thankfully, a family friend visiting my brother at the time immediately did CPR, and Cassandra began to breathe again. We called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived a short while later. One of the paramedics, a male, told us that Cassandra should be transferred to Sick Kids Hospital right away. They brought Cassandra to Peel Memorial Hospital, and upon arriving at the Brampton Hospital, Cassandra would be placed into a cubicle. My husband and I closely watched Cassandra, and we could see that another seizure was coming on. And we tried to alert the nurses that she was switching, but they didn't do anything immediately to prioritize Cassandra and brushed off our concerns. Moments later, Cassandra would have the worst grand mal seizure ever. Her eyes rolled back into her head. She began squealing loudly. Her back was arched, her body was jerking violently, and her head was banging against the gurney. We were screaming for help. Nursing staff came running in, and a nurse jumped on top of the gurney to try and hold Cassandra's body down. They then brought Cassandra into another cubicle, and we could see them intubating her and injecting medication. From this point, we would never see Cassandra become responsive again. And although Cassandra's life was in extreme danger, Cassandra was not airlifted to Sick Kids, but rather an ambulance from Sick Kids would drive from Toronto to Brampton, pick up Cassandra, and then proceeded to drive to Sick Kids. My husband and I did our best to try and stay calm, but it was very hard knowing how sick Cassandra was. When we arrived at Sick Kids Hospital, a doctor asked myself, my husband, and Cassandra's biological mother to speak in a private room. He indicated that the CAT scans that my husband and I brought, the same one that the earlier neurologist did not have concerns over, showed apparently an old head injury. 25 years later, we learned that the image was due to a shadow on the CAT scan being broken, but never told us prior to that. The doctor asked if anyone knew how this injury happened. We were all shocked and didn't understand why he was asking us these questions. We all confirmed that none of us had harmed Cassandra in any way. The doctor also said that too much precious time had lapsed between the originating hospital and Sick Kids, and that Cassandra's brain was swollen and she was in grave danger. The doctors and nurses said they had stabilized Cassandra and told us to go home and get some rest. And within a few hours, we received a call advising us that Cassandra was brain dead. She was in a coma and was being kept alive by a life support machine. I remember standing out in our kitchen when the call came in, and I just began to cry, and I screamed for my husband, Ashley. Sadly and tragically, on April 11th, 1991, Cassandra was officially declared brain dead, and life support was removed. It was the most devastating day of our lives as a family, and still continues to be. Several days after Cassandra's funeral, the police asked to speak to my husband and I, and it was during these meetings that the police said someone had struck Cassandra. During these meetings, which I later learned were interrogations, they initially tried to have me pinpoint my husband, and they also tried to get my husband to pinpoint me as having harmed Cassandra. When this didn't work, the sole focus was on me. Why? Because I was stepmother. During a brief interview with Officer Kirk, he made it clear to me I was to give them, the investigating officers, what they wanted, or else the newspapers the next day would read stepmother kills stepdaughter, and my children would be taken away. On the advice of close family friends, we sought out a lawyer. We asked Mr. Callahan to attend with us, but he was not available, but could recommend a retired RCMP officer to accompany us for a fee. We didn't have the money. I was on welfare, and Ashley was the only one working to support the family at the time. We attended the police station for the interviews, hoping they would investigate the hospital, as we thought Cassandra had died because of them. I later learned that I was the only person subjected to a polygraph. And despite answering all the questions by the police and cooperating fully, they were not satisfied that I didn't harm Cassandra. They completely ignored the concerns my husband and I had expressed about her lack of medical treatment at the hospital in Brampton and her stay. My polygraph went on for several grueling hours. I was emotionally, mentally, and physically drained. I was on medication to help me deal with the depression of Cassandra's death, and I had many wires attached to me, and it was very scary. I was given 1 can of Coke in the process. No food was offered. And there were officers going in and out of the room, and each time they left, I could hear the door lock. No one told me I could leave or go home if I wanted. There was one officer pretending to be sympathetic, and another one pouncing on me with guilt. They kept telling me Charles Smith told them that I had killed Cassandra and that there was proof. I continued trying to tell them I hadn't done anything, but it wasn't enough. I was tired of hearing, "I don't believe you are being honest with us, Maria." I just couldn't handle any more, and I wanted them to stop. They kept asking me if I was wearing a watch, my watch, on April 9th, and they kept telling me that Cassandra had died from a blow to the head. I continued to tell them that I didn't do anything, and I said that I didn't understand how Cassandra had a blow to the head. Eventually, I knew they were not going to let me go home unless I did what Officer Kirk told me. It was to give them what they wanted. I gave them a false statement, and indeed the question stopped abruptly. And then the focus was me signing a statement. An officer typed the whole statement on a typewriter and told me to sign it. They then said officers were going to my home to pick up my husband when I was told that he was waiting for me in the lobby. They brought my husband into the room and they told me to confess to his face. They told me I would get out on bail the next day because I had no prior incidents with the police. The police charged me with manslaughter. I was held for bail and then released with my mother as my surety. She secured my bail of $20,000 using their home as a collateral. I was stripped away from my newborn daughter, Chelsea, my 1-year-old daughter, Natasha, and 5-year-old son, Jordan. And they went to live with my parents, and I could no longer live or be alone with them. My husband and I stayed together to fight the legal battle. My parents, who were in their mid-50s, suddenly became the full-time caregivers to our children. My pretrial days were difficult. I obtained legal aid and I retained Mr. Callahan as my first lawyer. He did not represent my best interest in the least. And there was one occasion where I missed signing into the police station. I was late, actually, because I had just visited Cassandra at the cemetery earlier that afternoon. I had gone home and I was crying and I'd fallen asleep. But in the wee hours of the following morning, just after midnight, I turned myself in wearing my pajamas, and I was again arrested and held for bail. They charged me with breach of recognizance. At the time that I turned myself in, the police didn't even know I was missing. But I was once again being truthful, and I was charged again. I was convicted of this offense, but thankfully my second lawyer, Mr. Wiley, had the conviction overturned. At my preliminary hearing proceedings, Mr. Callahan did not put up any aggressive defense argument at all. He didn't retain any other expert witnesses to challenge Charles Smith. He never showed me disclosure. He would only meet with me a handful of times briefly and no more. He made sure to get my legal aid certificate, though. He was clearly impressed and swayed by Smith, almost intimidated, I would think now, looking at it so many years later. I still have so many unanswered questions regarding his representation of me, but those questions will remain unanswered as Mr. Callahan has passed. May he rest in peace. During the preliminary hearing, Charles Smith walked in the courtroom like a celebrity superstar. I felt he was very full of himself and carried himself in a way that felt short of what I thought an expert witness was. I listened to his testimony and I couldn't understand how everyone understood what he was saying. I later discharged Mr. Callahan. I retained my new lawyer, Mr. Wiley, and Mr. Wiley would immediately take steps to have my breach of recognizance conviction overturned. He would meet with me on a regular basis, and for the first time, I would start seeing the Crown's disclosure. I continued to advise Mr. Wiley that I hadn't done anything, and I hadn't harmed Cassandra, and I professed my innocence. Mr. Wiley would take steps to obtain authorization from legal aid to retain other experts, one locally and one in Philadelphia. He retained a private investigator named Jack. And at this point, the feeling of hope started to come, but it didn't stay for long. The 2 forensic experts retained by Mr. Wiley concurred with Smith, and I couldn't understand how. Mr. Wiley, retaining the private investigator, we later learned that this investigator was actually trying to get statements against me. He wasn't trying to get statements to help me, and he was later discharged from his duties. Any hope I had at that time quickly started dying. And after very careful consideration with both Mr. Wiley and my forensic psychologist, in September of 1992, I entered a false guilty plea to save what was left of my family. There was no hope. No one was willing to challenge Charles Smith. Nobody, not at least in the 1990s when my case was ongoing and several cases thereafter. My fate was sealed. This recommendation and decision were extremely difficult for Mr. Wiley too. He believed in me and he believed in my innocence. But the Crown offered a deal. Mr. Wiley then decided he needed to ensure my unborn child and I would be protected in the prison. He wanted to find the fastest way to get the baby and I home to keep me out of the federal penitentiary. All the while, my parents were suffering quietly with all the stress, especially my mother. With a false guilty plea, I would be sentenced to 2 years less a day in a provincial institution, which is equivalent to 729 days with 3 years probation, rather than a 5-year sentence in a Kingston prison for women, far away from the children and my husband. And being close and serving that time in a prison close to the family and children will allow me to see them. Being at Vanier would allow me to have touch visits and a shorter sentence. A recommendation for early parole would be made. And I would have a better chance of regaining custody of my children because I was showing remorse. When I entered my false guilty plea and was subsequently sentenced, I was in the first trimester of the pregnancy of my youngest daughter, Chanel. It was possible that I could be paroled in time to deliver my daughter outside of the prison. I also stood a better chance of not losing another newborn if I showed remorse for a crime I didn't commit. I know that Mr. Wiley took it very hard that I had taken the guilty plea, but I believe he saved my life, he saved my daughter's life, and he saved my family. On October 22nd, 1992, I was handcuffed and shackled at the feet, loaded into a paddy wagon, brought to the Metro West Detention Center, where I would be assessed. This would be my first experience being strip searched and all the humiliating parts of it. Imagine being strip searched, squatting, coughing in front of strangers for most of your pregnancy. I endured this over and over again during my prison term. I started my sentence at Metro West Detention Center, where I had an anxiety attack within hours. When I was at admission and discharge, I was told to tell the inmates that I was there for murdering my husband because baby killers get killed. That's what people are called when it involves the death of a child. You are the worst of the worst, the lowest of the low. But by the time I was brought to the range, the cell block range, a large TV hanging from the ceiling was showing my case on the news. So that advice was moot. I was housed initially in protective custody, but I would later have to waive protective custody in order to have touch visits with my children at Vanier. At Vanier, inmates threatened me from as early as the admission and discharge unit. Inmates told me that they were waiting for me. A common saying was, "You're the baby killer." My life was in constant danger, and at any time an inmate could attack me. There were times when we were locked down because knives went missing, and sometimes they feared the knife was meant for me. There was an occasion where an inmate threatened to shove a broomstick up my ass to kill my daughter and I. This is prison life. When I was eligible to apply for temporary absence pass after completing the programs ordered in my sentence, the superintendent warden denied my request because they didn't like me, the baby killer, or my conviction. But with the help of a liaison worker and the Black Awareness Group, I was later allowed to go home on an overnight pass. The institution was just around the corner from my parents' home. Excuse me. My cell window faced the road leading to my parents' home. It was excruciating knowing I was just walking distance from the children. And I often daydreamed of escaping, but then I would always think of my children, and I would never see them again if I had chosen to do so. Excuse me. Most people would count their days by crossing off each night that passed. I chose to cross off each morning because knowing I could sleep off those hours, and it would be easier to sleep away the hours in hell than to watch the clock during the day. Excuse me. I applied to the parole board for early parole. I had to once again accept false responsibility for Cassandra's death in order to get out. I was initially denied because the members of the parole board said that I was too emotional. Perhaps I cried too much. I was doing all that I could to get back home and prove my innocence. I didn't belong there. I was finally paroled on my second attempt. In March of 1993, I was released to and supervised by the Elizabeth Fry Society. I gave birth to my daughter. We were separated immediately, and I still have no recollection of the actual labor and delivery of my daughter. The only memory that I have is asking for Demerol twice for pain. I have no memories of holding her after she was born. And in addition to losing Cassandra, I'm forever damaged by that. I was released on full parole in June of 1993, and it was a good feeling to be back in the community, and I would continue the fight of my life. It was time to start rebuilding our family and headed to family court. And after approximately 3 years of family court proceedings, our family's autonomy was restored. In approximately 2007, I was advised that James Lockyer wished to meet with me. It was at this meeting that I learned that Charles Smith and Sick Kids Hospital were being investigated and that an inquiry was underway. I was so happy that Charles Smith was caught. I was happy that the truth about Charles Smith was finally starting to come to the surface. I tried for so long to tell my story, but no one cared to listen or simply didn't believe what I was saying about Charles Smith. I was a nobody, a baby killer, a convict, but my wrongful conviction was finally being reviewed. My emotions were overwhelming. I went into a deep depression. Grieving Cassandra's death had been quiet and isolated all of those years. And during those years, we couldn't have Cassandra's photos out in the open because it would always raise questions. We decided to bring out her photos for her birthday and Christmas every year. On her birthdays, we gather and sing Cassandra happy birthday. And for Christmases, Jordan places the picture with his sister on the tree. When my case was reopened, so many bottled emotions came rushing in and I had a breakdown. A coroner's inquest was held in 1997 and it was crucifying. I again had to falsely accept responsibility for Cassandra's death because I was on probation and I couldn't risk having it revoked for recanting remorse. The newspapers once again went on the attack. I was a monster, the baby killer. There were 73 recommendations made and aimed at getting society to take child abuse more seriously. This was the coroner's message to Cassandra. We, the jury, on behalf of the community of the region of Peel, wish to express our sympathy for the loss of Cassandra. Your life was short and fragile, and many people were touched by your presence. My apologies. The system failed to hold your hands tightly and keep you safe. They had eyes, yet they did not see. They had ears, yet they did not hear. They did not look through the eyes of a child. We are strongly convinced that concrete changes have to be done to our society's outlook on child abuse. We've put our minds together to come up with a very realistic recommendations. However, we feel that these suggestions will only remain as empty words scribbled on a piece of paper if they fall on deaf ears. It is our utmost desire that our recommendation be heard, analyzed, and implemented so that Cassandra may now rest in peace and that all the little ones whom she had left behind may be assured a safe and happy home. Our family deserves an apology because the very people who wrote those words had the same doctor that was involved in my wrongful conviction. Further, to bolster the case against me, though, you should know that the police charged our family doctor as well, saying that he was covering up abuse. But those charges were later dismissed by the court. I always maintained a sense of hope that I could prove my innocence. I watched my husband, my entire family suffer, including my mother and my father. My mother always prayed she would be alive to see the day that I was acquitted. My mother, my hero, passed away just 7 months before my acquittal. My children grew up with a mother known as a convicted murderer of their sister, and openly admit it has almost taken my life many times. But the doctors, Charles Smith, Jim Cairns, and James Young, all resigned from their positions. How easy it was for them to enter into an agreement without any of us knowing, any of their victims or string of victims of wrongful convictions knowing. And the College of Physicians and Surgeons sanctioned Charles Smith by imposing a pathetic fine of $3,650 for his involvement in the numerous wrongful convictions he caused. In family court, I lost custody of my son Jordan to his biological father. How? He used my manslaughter conviction to convince the court that I was a danger to my son, when in fact I never was. Several years later, my son called his worker at Peel Children's Center to report that his father had abused him and didn't want to go back. The marriage with my husband, my amazing husband, has been tried and tested hundreds of times due to the emotional trauma. But here we are together 35 years later, and I love him deeply, and I'm grateful for him for being one of my strongest pillars. There is so much more to talk about, but the domino effects of a wrongful conviction are deep. The post-traumatic stress disorder is deep. It's lifelong. And regardless of how much time you're sentenced to, it can be little or the most, it could be the death penalty. A wrongful conviction is a life sentence. The cases of Charles Smith is not limited to me. There are many other victims of Charles Smith, but there are many other victims around the world who are victims of wrongful convictions of crimes they didn't commit or did not commit. And what's sad about this is in instances like that, either the actual perpetrator is still on the street while somebody is serving time, or somebody's life has been torn apart because a crime never even happened and pseudoscientific evidence was entered into criminal proceedings. There's a lot to learn about wrongful convictions, and it's never easy for a wrongly convicted person to share their story. In fact, it's traumatic every time we do. But the only way that we can help our communities to continue advocating and teaching the community, the world, that these actually happen, that innocent people actually either plead guilty to crimes or have been wrongly convicted for crimes. I hope what I've shared with you can shed some light on this ever so growing problem that we have, which is a blight on the criminal justice system. And I'm honored to have been here with you today, Andrew.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate you taking this time. I know everyone who is listening appreciates you taking the time to do this because, as you said, it, and you've spoken to me as well before this, and even hearing it again, it is difficult just to hear. So I can imagine how difficult it must be to share. I think one question that would be on everyone's mind now is, how is your family today?
I can say that my family is intact. We are together. We are functioning as normally as possible as a family. But, you know, to be honest with you, there's still moments where we have the ripple and domino effects of, you know, the trauma from the wrongful convictions. But overall, my husband and I have 7 beautiful grandchildren. Our children are incredible and strong. What can I say? It's a blessing to see that ultimately the sacrifice you make for your family happened, right?
I want to help everyone understand some of the things that you shared, which I think people may miss about. Uh, you started out by listing some of the common causes of wrongful convictions, like false confessions
Yes.
and imagined crimes and different things, right? One of the factors that were was at play in your case was the mandatory minimum, and that was that's something that people may not understand the kind of position you were in terms of the weight of the evidence and the choice that was put to you, where either you plead guilty or face this kind of evidence, which everyone is saying can't be challenged, and risk going to prison um, uh, for a very, very, very long time. Could you just comment some more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I get asked a question often, like, why would an innocent person plead guilty? It's easy for anybody out in the public who's never found themselves in a situation that they never thought they'd be in. You know, it's easy for them to come to the conclusion that, oh, I would never do that. And every individual is different, and every individual has a breaking point. For me, the breaking point was we've lost one of our children. You're now saying that I've done something and you're going to tear my family apart. What is it that you really want? You want to have a quick conviction. The police want to, satisfy the community that they're doing their job. So they're going to do and go to whatever lengths or means necessary in order to secure a conviction. You see, here in Canada, we have now passed a bill, which is the Miscarriages of Justice Commission. It's underway and it's forming. And in the roundtable discussions, I did say that it's so much faster to create a wrongful conviction than it is to free someone from one. But until one actually finds themselves in the same situation I or myself or other people have been, where the question to you or the options to you are, you can continue to say you're innocent. But if you are convicted at a trial, we're going to seek this length of a prison term for you. But you know what? Here's the other side. If you take this deal now, and if you take it early, we'll give you this. So that's why, in my view, they call it plea deals, because that's what it is. It's a deal. You give them what they want, and they'll be easier on you. So in my case, I had an option. You take me, or I lose my family. Potentially losing the kids to CAS or, Children's Aid or Child Protection Services. I said my family should have never been put through what they were put through. And I felt under the circumstances, I was willing to sacrifice my freedom, my life to get out sooner, to not only keep my family together, which was the priority, but to prove my innocence. So I would ask people themselves, if you found yourself in a situation where you had nothing to do with a crime, and you were placed in a room over and over, and then you were given these options, would you save your family? And I know many people have come back and had a second thought and said, I never looked at it that way.
Well, that's exactly where I want to go, because I think that many people, when they think of wrongful convictions, they are thinking they have an image of someone who is basically a criminal, a hardened criminal, and they're trying to find a technical loophole. They're not thinking of themselves, and they're not thinking about somebody like you. And not that a person who fits the image is not entitled to due process. But I I I I think your story is so important because it shows people that this is something that can happen to anybody. Did you, in your wildest imagination, ever imagine that you could be caught up in this way in the Canadian legal system and for
Never,
so long?
never. I never thought. I was raised by parents that were block parents in the community that work with the police to keep an eye out on the community. I was raised to believe that the police were there and everything that they did was, upright and correct. I was raised in a strict household that had strict rules. I mean, I was a typical kid that, would rebel when I was a teenager, but by no means, in a million years would have I ever imagined finding myself in a position being questioned about a murder of one of my own children or one of the children in our family, or a murder for that matter. It is one of the most damaging, devastating experiences ever. And just to give you a little insight, I don't know if anybody of you are familiar with the show Cops.
Yes.
Okay, they used to sing that song.
Bad boys, bad boys.
Right. I used to watch that religiously, and I thought and honestly believed that every arrest they made was amazing until I found myself there. And, I'm often asked, do I feel that my husband and I were discriminated against? To be honest, in actuality, it's very possible. I was on welfare. I was a single mom. I was young. My husband's black. I'm Asian. I mean, back in the early 1990s, late 80s, the idea of having a blended family like that was taboo. My mother raised me not to see people because of color, not because of their cultural background, but rather to see them as people. And it was just so much of it. There's so much more to the story that, if we had 4 hours, I'd share it with you. But the important thing is there are all kinds of ways that you can be discriminated against in the process of going through a criminal investigation or criminal prosecution. And until you have a good lawyer that finds it and can argue it and is brave enough to do so, you better keep looking.
And that was where I wanted to go to next, because your case touches so many uh, aspects of the criminal legal system and so many different players. One of the players that is there in your case is the role of the defense attorney. That you had one defense attorney who didn't come up to standard, and another defense attorney who did the best he could. Um, but how important is, in your experience, because I want to talk some more about your advocacy work. In your experience, how important is the role of the defense attorney in helping people to escape these situations?
The best way that I can put it is this: in a criminal prosecution, when you're the accused, the relationship that you have with your defense counsel is so critical. There has to be a level of trust between you both. In other words, I'll give you an example. I trusted Mr. Callahan because he came recommended to me by members of the community, and he failed me. Then I trusted Mr. Wiley. Mr. Wiley did everything that he could for me, even in my view, saving my family's life and autonomy. But trust is your first thing. And if you're meeting with a criminal defense lawyer or attorney and you don't feel comfortable, get a second opinion, get a third opinion. Don't stay with one. You need to feel comfortable with who your lawyer is. And as defense counsel, your client has to feel that they can trust you, infinitely with representing them, their best interest in their life. But to me, a good criminal defense lawyer leaves no stone unturned. Let me make that clear. One of the key things that I say all the time when I speak is that the most critical part of a criminal case is the disclosure. And for those that don't understand what disclosure is basically the package of evidence or the evidence which the prosecution intends to use in order to prosecute you. And when I say going over disclosure and getting disclosure, it should not be limited to just notes. The lawyer needs to make sure it's everything: audio, video, police notes, you name it. And the defense lawyer needs to take the time to review each of these carefully and go to their client and ask their client, what's your version of what happened here? Because if you don't do that, what are you really, really representing your client for? The representation of a criminal defense lawyer is the basis upon which the client has a story. And if you miss that story, you may miss the innocence or the parts that will show that the prosecution has either committed constitutional violations, or even in the States, Brady violations. But the relationship with criminal defense counsel is super important. Whether it's in criminal or any case that you're involved in, you have to have that relationship. And that needs to happen to clear and go over all of the documents.
Since your exoneration, you have been an advocate, and you have been speaking about wrongful convictions not only in Canada but even in the Caribbean. Could you please share a bit about your this role that you have and the work that you have been doing?
Yes, absolutely. I decided to pursue an area of law and become a paralegal here in Ontario, Canada, which requires licensing through the Law Society of Ontario. Now, part of that was spearheaded by Mr. Wiley, the support of Mr. Wiley and other criminal defense counsel I had worked for. But at the same point in time, the experience itself, I wanted to be able to possibly contribute to change, positive change. Being an advocate means, I'm representing clients' best interests. So I do summary conviction criminal right now. So I'm a licensed paralegal, and I can do summary conviction criminal, non-indictable. So indictable, I send off to my colleagues in the criminal justice community. But for me, even when I'm handling any types of the cases that I am right now, the important factor is that I make sure that I get all the facts from my clients. Because I can't tell a client's story. I can't look at a case thoroughly without having my client's version. In terms of wrongful conviction advocacy, I was honored in 2018 to be nominated to the Board of Innocence Canada. Innocence Canada used to be the Association in Defense of Wrongfully Convicted, of the wrongly convicted, and now Innocence Canada. And I proudly accepted the position, and I have maintained my position as co-director on the board to this day. Innocence Canada, to me, is one of the most important organizations here in Canada, and their work is hard and tireless. It is burning candles on both ends and making sure the system works, and when it doesn't, they call it out. That is incredible. But doing other things, like even when I'm in the States, I've provided presentations to all levels of the criminal justice system, including to the bench. In one of those presentations, I was actually in Detroit, Michigan, and I happened to meet one of the parish judges there in Jamaica, and she was just lovely. And in traveling to Jamaica with my husband, we've been there several times, and when we go there, I've come across so many beautiful people in the community, and we end up talking about law in general, and then they tend to ask, what is it that you do? And so when I mentioned that the work that I do, the conversation came up that they were really interested. The students were very interested in the subject of wrongful convictions, because there is none. There's no Innocence Project in Jamaica, as far as I understand. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And some of them indicated the dangers in being the brave one to try and call it out. But there is a court system there. There's a justice system that exists there. The question is, how well aware is the criminal justice system in Jamaica, and how educated are they on wrongful convictions? In a recent case in the Dominican Republic that came to my attention, I realized in that case, which later ended up in an acquittal, that the Dominican Republic case, there were so many constitutional violations that it was shocking. So much to the point that there was an overturning of a conviction, an immediate conviction registered there and sentenced with no trial. I'm hoping that these things and these constitutional violations aren't happening in Jamaica, but I'm genuinely interested in investing myself in what is happening in Jamaica. But as an advocate, whether it's here or I speak in the United States or another country, what does not change is the need to ensure that our system, our justice systems work, and that there's no hidden agendas for quick convictions, for the sacrifice. Part of the advocacy work that I do is, learning more about death row cases in the United States. Recently, death row case in the United States, Melissa Lucio, Robbie Robertson, Jimmy Duncan. These are cases that really, really, raises a red flag to say, how did this person even get convicted? And how many times have the people that have been involved in these particular cases, specifically doctors that may have been involved in providing information that was either pseudoscientific, fabricated, or non-existent at all?
Right.
How is it that they're not being held accountable? So if it's happening there and it's happening in another country that I know, it's got to be happening around the world.
Well, that is why I thought it was so important to talk to you, because where 20 in the time when you were convicted, the Canada was coming into an awareness, or it wasn't even was beginning to learn about wrongful convictions, and after Dr. Charles Smith's escapades came to light, there was a real reckoning. And I think that I'm hoping that as people hear about your case and what's happening in Canada in terms of the Miscarriages of Justice Commission and the Criminal Case Review Commission in the UK, that an awareness that these things happen, to normal people, that these things happen in many different cases, that it will set people on fire and make them interested in a change. Just yesterday, I was interviewing an attorney from the Bahamas, because she represented someone at the Privy Council who made a false confession, and his case was dealt with by the Court of Appeal in the Bahamas in a very terse way, But the when it was re-examined at the Privy Council, it was clear that he had been tortured to make this confession. But the point is that there was a reckoning there that these things happen. And in Barbados, there were some decisions not so long ago about at the Caribbean Court of Justice, again about false confessions. And so I'm hoping that we will have a real conversation in the Caribbean, not just about the existence of these things, but also about what we can do about them. I think one of the things that will make a difference, we have started to try to compile a registry to have some empirical basis to say, all right, here are the numbers. This is what we've been able to find in Jamaica of people who have been wrongfully convicted, and these are the categories. But I do want to ask you,
Sure.
the what do you think, based on having that experience of having to wait until people came into that knowledge? What do you think, if you were able to look back, what do you think is needed in this point to get people active and interested and motivated to bring about some sort of change?
Well, perhaps I can put it this way. We often hear the term ignorance of the law is no excuse. Ignorance of the rule of law, to which others are sworn to, is no excuse. I think it's incumbent upon an imperative upon anybody working in the justice system or in law in general to ensure that they're well educated about the causes of wrongful convictions and that it does exist. To say that they don't exist in a certain place is a flat out lie, because the justice system has flaws all over it. But what is important is to ensure how efficiently and expeditiously those errors are corrected.
Right.
You see, as I alluded to earlier in my presentation, I had tried from 1991 to tell people this doctor is not, he's not telling the truth. This is not what happened. I've tried to say that 16 and a half years. It took 16 and a half years. And in those 16 and a half years, other people were wrongly convicted as a result of the testimony of this doctor and the evidence of this doctor. We can't be blind. We should not be blind. We should not deafen the ears to hear about the truth. It's hard to admit when a system is flawed. Why? Well, let's see. There's some ripple effects, right? If we have a prosecutor in a case come forward and say, well, yeah, it is a wrongful conviction. Well, what happens next? Well, it's going to be an application for compensation. Well,
Right.
we're talking about money.
Right.
You know, in some cases, and this is my opinion, and nobody can say otherwise. When you're holding somebody on death row in the United States, and they've been acquitted of the offense, but the prosecution or the state attorney continues to hold them in whilst they finding some way to charge the person again. That's taxpayers' money that you're holding an innocent person in prison. There's absolutely no excuse and no exception. He's been released, he should be out. But oftentimes they don't want to admit the error. It's in some cases, and it's sad to say, it's less expensive to put somebody on death row and inject them and kill them than it is to keep them as an inmate on death row for 27 years. It's horrendous. It is horrific. It is tragic, unjust. And whether or not we're talking about Canada and the United States, forcing somebody to continue to a wrongful conviction when a prosecutor knows darn well that that's not the case, the person's not guilty, but you don't want to come forward because there's errors. That's a disgrace to the justice system. That is a cause to wrongful convictions, and it is a disgraceful blight that needs to be addressed. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about people that refuse to come forward and say, yes, this likely was a miscarriage of justice. To those that have, I applaud them. I'm grateful to them. I will offer myself in any way to help. But to those still holding on to a case out of pride, may a wrongful conviction never happen to you, because it.
Maria Shepherd, thank you very much for taking the time out. I think you have given us more than enough to think about. Is there something that, well, where, if people want to find you,
Yes.
where do they find you? And is there anything that you'd like to leave with us?
I think just in terms of finding me, I'm easily found on Google, Instagram, social media. I'm not one to, but it's nice. If anybody ever needs to reach out to me, just look me up on Innocence Canada, and you'll find my profile there. If someone is wrongfully convicted and are afraid to come forward, please feel comfortable to come forward and reach out to me, even perhaps to provide you with an avenue to open up about your story. And in closing, I'm extremely grateful for the work that you're doing, Andrew, for the Caribbean as well. I think it's really, really important. My love goes to the people of Jamaica, Barbados, Bahamas. I haven't been yet, but I will one day. But I'm grateful and still a proud Canadian, despite everything that I went through, because I have seen evidence and I'm living proof that the system can work.
Yes, I should say that just before we close, that one of the things that why I really wanted to talk to you is because I think I applaud the fact that Canada has taken the steps it has to own up to mistakes and to put in place a system review and to make changes. I think it's really commendable. And so I think your story is really helpful because it shows people in Jamaica, not just that the system can be broken or is broken somewhere sometimes, but that there is somewhere next to go. There is a solution. There are possibilities for change. And so I definitely, that's something that I think is really important just to emphasize.
Yeah,
Thank you
and I
again.
think, I think if I might just add, I truly believe that there's people afraid to come forward to say that they had been wrongly convicted.
Yeah.
I truly believe that. But if that's the case, there are organizations around the world that would, they have phone lines you can call and reach out. If you're a wrongly convicted person, and you're holding on to a thin string of hope, hope never dies. There's support systems all over the world. And I hope to be able to continue being able to do that along with, people like yourself and other members of the justice system. But again, it's always amazing to have people like you, Andrew, that are genuinely invested in opening up this subject in a country that I believe so desperately needs it. So, for that, bravo to you.
Thank you. And thank you again for taking the time. Thanks to everyone who joined us. We really appreciate you taking the time to watch. Remember to subscribe and to continue to share. This video will be posted and we will be making clips from it so you can continue to share it with others to spread the knowledge and awareness of this topic. Until next time. Hey, thanks for listening. Stuck is written and presented by me, Andrew Wiles. It is brought to you by The Wave on the Frequency Network. Subscribe to Stuck wherever you get your podcasts. You can read more about the project at andrewwiles.com. And if you found the conversation interesting or helpful, share it. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.